Greetings of the day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are here to start the session on modernizing with containers and serverless Q&A. The agenda is to take you through what to expect in this session, team introductions, open it for Q&A, and then we'll do the closing. And how to engage in this session. This is a hybrid session. For hybrid engagement, the code of conduct is already put in the chat. For in-person room engagement, please be respectful, and all the SMEs seated here in the panel will be answering all the questions that come up in the room as well as digitally. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Devanshi Joshi. I'm the Product Marketing Manager for Serverless on Azure. Along with me is a panel of experts who are going to introduce themselves now, starting with Eamon.
Hey everyone, I'm Ahmed. I'm a PM on the AKS team for the developer experience.
Hi everyone, my name is Nick Greenfield. I'm a product manager. I work on the Dapr project. I'm also a Dapr maintainer. Yeah.
Thanks, Nick. Hey everyone, my name's Eamon O'Reilly. I'm a PM on the Azure Functions team.
Hi everyone, Jorge Palma, lead PM on AKS.
Hi, I'm Sophia. I'm a PM on Container Apps.
Hello everybody, I'm Carrie. I'm a PM on Container Apps as well, and previously I was a PM on the Functions team.
Hey, and I'm Anthony. I'm a PM on the Container Apps team. And joining us, we actually have a bunch of folks from Container Apps engineering team. So ask the really difficult questions.
Yes, and we also have speakers and experts joining us virtually. We have Daria. Daria, want to unmute and introduce yourself?
Hi everyone, I'm Daria Grigoriu. I'm a PM manager in Azure Container Apps.
Thank you. Okay. I think that's all I see who have joined in as experts. Okay, great. Thank you, everyone. So in this room, ask us about Azure Container Apps, Azure Functions, anything on Azure Kubernetes Fleet Manager, Azure Kubernetes Service, or the Kubernetes apps on Marketplace. As we kick this off, let us take you through the recap of some of the recent announcements that's come out from all these products today. To take you through AKS, we have Jorge Palma.
All right, I didn't thought this through when I put so many things on the slide. So go ahead and read through it. I might call out just a couple of them to hit out. So we recently GA'd a number of capabilities from Kubernetes and AKS long-term support to workload identity. We also GA here at Build the managed Prometheus service with Azure Monitor, and a couple weeks ago, the general availability of Azure CNI overlay for overlay networking capabilities. Also announced today, we have the Kubernetes app in the marketplace GA. So we were actually all the solutions that we have there, we GA with a number of partners, and you're able to deploy them directly into AKS clusters. Very recently as well, we reached the 2.0 stable milestone for Azure Service Operator project. The Azure Fleet Manager got several new features. One of the key ones that we have in preview is the ability to have update groups, which allow you to create different environments for your clusters, like staging, dev, prod, and then orchestrate the updates to them. For example, the updates for Kubernetes versions, or for any maintenance that we do, you can always say, get my dev first, test second, and prod third, for example, or different capabilities. Continuing there, we did a number of features and additional capabilities for upgrades themselves. And a key one is the breaking change validations. So for all of you using Kubernetes, you might know that as you move from version to version, some things get deprecated and removed from the Kubernetes API. So we actually launched a feature from 126 onwards that actually checks not only for the components you have in cluster, but also for your operators, your clients calling the API. If any of them is using a deprecated API, we'll actually stop the upgrade and we'll tell you exactly which API you're using and which component and user agent is using that API, so you can fix it. We would fix your code if we could, but that's still TBD. We have also previewed a number of more flexible functionalities, such as the Windows node configuration and kubelet configuration for Windows nodes. This was in combination with the Windows team and upstream efforts to deliver a lot of those functionalities into Windows containers upstream. So you can now define things like the amount of logs and log sizes that you can actually configure by the kubelet on Windows. You also have Generation 2 support for Windows VMs and the Windows nodes. Passing on from Windows to Linux, we're really excited to announce the general availability, actually, see, I made a mistake, of Azure Linux, which we just rebranded from Mariner. So if you knew CBL Mariner before, we're actually making generally available the Azure Linux, now rebranded to Azure Linux, which is a Microsoft-built, maintained, patched Linux distro. We've been using it internally for our first parties for a long time, and we're really happy to make it available for all customers now in GA. The next one we have is confidential containers for AKS. We casually refer to it as CoCo many times, as if you hear it around, and that is basically the ability to have the next level of encryption from not just at rest or in transit, but also during compute operations themselves. And we've had several capabilities for this introduced into AKS and into the Azure Stack for a while. So you had confidential VMs, you've had a confidential add-on, and it actually made you use things like the SDK from Intel to make sure your applications use this isolated memory, this confidential memory blocks. That requires some app changes, and we were not satisfied with that. So confidential containers comes in to actually allow you to have, without any changes to your application, the ability to have that isolated and confidential memory usage. And finally, we got the Istio managed add-on that we launched a couple of weeks ago at KubeCon, and new changes that we just actually reviewed on the previous sessions today that I definitely recommend everybody to check out, to have draft in the Azure portal, which we call the automated containerization and deployment features. All right, I need to breathe, so I'm going to pass it on.
That was a long run through, George. Thank you. Any questions in the room or digitally for George on AKS and the team?
On here, it's really impressed with all the new features to AKS I've seen it build.
Yeah, thank you for the praise. So this is the question on functions. So can Azure Functions deployed on virtual machines as a zip deployment or container deployment? I guess, can they be deployed that way is the question. I wanted to do this without container apps or KEDA or using app service plans.
You're going to get some cardio.
Thanks, Anthony. Or AKS, I assume. I mean, you're just literally trying to pick a regular Windows VM and try to run functions. Yeah, it's not supported in that scenario. It's really designed to be containerized and then run in one of our environments like AKS or container apps, or obviously in our managed function serverless solution. As you know, our functions runtime and all of our triggers and bindings are open source. And so they are available. And so when you actually develop locally, you get the full runtime and the full trigger experience on your Windows machine when you're running it. So the functions runtime does run in Windows. It doesn't have to be containerized, but the only way to kind of get a managed image, especially if you want to hook up dynamic scaling, I know you mentioned you don't need KEDA, but the only way we kind of support that is through containerization and running it in one of our environments. But obviously you could run it using our local dev experience in a Windows environment if you needed to.
Thanks, Eamon. Yes, I'll get you the mic.
Have there been any recent updates in terms of cold start improvements that used to historically be a problem, especially with JavaScript based functions?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So yeah, there's one of the things we focus on. You know, one of the things about serverless in general, I know this meeting's a lot of discussion around serverless, and cold start is one of those challenges that you have to try to always focus on. And it's one of those things when customers are building APIs and they want that latency to be very low. It is a high demand on our serverless solution. So we've done a ton of work that is across all languages. So it's focused on JavaScript, I know got mentioned, but it's also across .NET, Node, Python, Java, all of them. And so there's been significant improvements in performance, and we will be able to talk more on kind of over the summer. But if you tried out the solution now for serverless in consumption, I think you would see it's really, really fast. And so you don't really have to have those reserved instances as much, even for API development. So yeah, tons of work going on in that space.
Okay, so we had a natural transition to functions in that spirit. Eamon, how about a recent?
We're back.
Yeah.
Okay. It's yeah, no, tons going on in functions. These are some of the highlights I think that we can call out here. Hopefully, a lot of you are familiar with them, but one of our focus in functions is to improve the developer experience. How do we make that developer experience as good as possible so that you get that productivity all the way into the runtime experience that happens in our cloud, so that we can, reduce operational overhead, but also have that dynamic scaling or scale to zero, all of those benefits you get of running in the cloud. And so we kind of have those two focuses of where we put our efforts. And you'll see a lot of these releases are related to those two experiences: improving developer productivity and improving how our service and runtime works. So the first one is all around kind of durable. We had a slide previously that Devanshi went through around, when you need state management inside of your functions, they're typically designed to be stateless, but a lot of applications require some state. And so durable functions is embedded into Azure Functions. So it gives you that unified development model when you're building Azure Functions, but requires state and managed workflow. And so there's two areas there around durable that we released recently. One was around support for .NET isolated model, as well as support for managed identity. So really trying to get developers not to require secrets and go secretless with managed identity integrated into, Key Vault and all of those nice things you get. Another big feature that went out recently was target-based scaling. And so if you're not familiar with how functions work, obviously we're event-driven architecture. So as the load increases, as events increase, we start to scale our compute dynamically to match that load, and then we scale back in when the load goes away. So target-based scaling gives a lot of control to the customer on how they want that scaling to work, and now they can dictate to the service how quickly they want that compute to scale. So a really awesome feature if you're building high throughput compute scenarios and you want to have a little bit more control. The Python programming model, this kind of falls into that area we talked about, developer productivity. And one of the things functions does is we manage the full stack, all the way from the language stack like Python, all the way through to the runtime as well as the infrastructure. And so everything is managed by us, but then you're the one that's trying to use that experience when you're developing your code. And so what we've done with the Python programming model is we've improved what we call a V2, so that as you develop your functions in Python now, it's going to feel very natural to you as a Python developer to take advantage of the functions programming model. And hopefully you'll try that out of the experience. Awesome feedback from customers who tried it out during the preview. So would love to hear more. I'll go quick through the rest because I know we might run out of time. But on the storage backend, again, durable. If you haven't tried durable, it's awesome. Please go try it. It might solve a ton of scenarios that you thought were very difficult in the past. But one of the things we added was we used to have durable backend that used Azure Storage, and it still does to maintain its state for you. But for really high throughput, some scenarios, it was slow, because storage has its own limitations. And so we introduced what we call Netherite, working with Microsoft Research. And this uses an Azure Files and Event Hub backend that really changes how durable functions at scale, if you really need that throughput, is available to you. So again, awesome work going on there. If you guys could try it out, I think you'd see a lot of benefits. There's a few other things to call out here. SQL, I don't know who uses SQL. I use SQL. Backend, a lot of our data ends up in SQL. There's events happening in SQL as things change. You want to trigger functions based on those events. There's now SQL bindings available in GA that you can actually go and integrate with to send data. And there's a preview version of triggers. So as things happen in SQL, you want to take action on that data, it's available. The big announcement, maybe why a lot of you guys are here, when Azure Functions can now run on cloud native microservices. So that went out in preview. You can basically deploy it into a container app environment, and you get all of that microservices functionality with easy connectivity, common networking. So a great solution if you have lots of different services that want to work well together. Any .NET devs here? Obviously, we focus on all of our languages. ASP.NET Core integration is available for you now, so you can try that out in preview. So if you're a dev familiar with ASP.NET, you want to bring that framework, use it inside functions, it's there built into the platform. You don't have to do anything. You start writing your code. And then a few other previews I'll just mention. The Data Explorer, so if you're used to writing all those Kusto queries, It's available to you now to actually integrate and get triggered when anything happens inside of your data explorer to be able to run code against that data. And then if you're using Azure Cache for Redis, you can actually trigger on those events as well. And so these are all the new ones. If you're familiar with functions, we basically integrate into all kinds of stuff in Azure, but also outside of Azure. So if you're using RabbitMQ, Kafka, all of those events are native as well. And then the last thing is SDK type bindings. If people aren't familiar with functions, when you get that object coming in, so this is the event, what this allows you now is to get actually a full fidelity object coming through. So it not only gives you the ability to have the data, but you can call the methods on that data as well. So really awesome for people who want full fidelity inside of functions.
Thanks for the quick roundup, Eamon. There's a couple of questions, so I guess you don't get to catch a breath. Okay, so the first one goes, if the function app in premium tier, if I have a function app in premium tier, will it support private root certificates?
Private root certificates?
Private root CA cert.
Yeah,
it's done in ASC and it's a little bit expensive. They would want to know if premium tier would support this. Yes.
Yeah, sorry. All right. The certificate is two aspects to it. It's a private route for the inbound traffic or outbound. If it's outbound, it works out of the box. Inbound, it will probably only work on app service environments. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you, Jenny. That was Jenny Lawrence from the Azure Container Apps engineering team. Okay. There's another one, but this is for ACA. And I think that's the right cue for Daria to take us through the ACA recent announcements, and then we'll hit the question. Go for it, Daria.
Happy to. And also I would like to point out the amazing Azure Container Apps team is there in the room, so I'll invite them to jump in at any time. We have a really great lineup of recent announcements. When we think about Azure Container Apps, we think about building for apps and microservices and supporting that with serverless containers. And so when we build our features, we build features for specialized components and also for the broader service in its entirety. So good examples of components that may be specialized in what value they deliver within your solution are jobs. And thanks to Anthony for showing us a demo of this earlier. These are tasks with finite lifespan that start, perform some processing, and then exit when complete. Another great example is the service add-ons, which are curated containers that are intended for development use. And also, in addition to that, ACA is introducing a new process for connecting the app to a service, regardless if that is an add-on or a managed service. And it really simplifies CLI experience to streamline your development process, to streamline the need to expand your microservices. And the first things that you can try are open source Redis and open source PostgreSQL with the corresponding managed services in Azure. We also have services and features that apply across the broader scope. And a great example of that is the Workload Profiles feature that applies to our consumption and dedicated plans. This is how you can customize the compute that you select, and you can run multiple apps in the same environment. Those apps, you can assign a workload profile per app. So if you just need general purpose compute and consumption, that's great. But if you need memory optimized, specialized compute, then you can assign that to apps in the same environment. With that, we also introduced a set of features for advanced network configuration, like user-defined routes, to help you configure and lock down your egress. So that's another great feature that we've been showing in the past few weeks. In addition to that, we have wonderful features for components like web, so CORS and session affinity. We've introduced init containers there are specialized containers that run to completion before your app containers are started. And we also have a recent announcement for the pre-managed TLS certificate, which is really a great feature to provision and renew your TLS certificates for any custom domain you add to your container app. In addition to that, we've evolved our Azure pipelines and GitHub actions. So these are now available to you and have a few new capabilities. You can definitely continue to build from your source code, from your repo to a container image, and we can push that to a container registry, deploy to container apps with or without a Docker file. We know how to use that when one is provided, and we know how to generate if we don't have it. So with that, we also have some ingress features that we've recently announced from the TCP GA to inbound IP restrictions. And just to kind of keep the list short, I also want to call out the improvements in Dapr. So I would like to invite Nick to say a word about that.
Thanks. Yeah, so this is something we're really excited about. We're calling it the easy component creation. So for those that are familiar with Dapr, you can connect to different technologies, so like state stores, pub sub message brokers, secret stores, all through Dapr. And those connections happen typically through a YAML that requires quite a bit of metadata to make those connections to those services. And so we thought it'd be really awesome to simplify that experience so that now when you're actually creating these components and connecting to Azure services, you just have to tell container apps, this is the API that I want to use. So I'm using PubSub as my message broker, and I want to use Azure Service Bus, and then just point to that instance of Service Bus in your subscription. And then between Dapr, this another service called Azure Service Connector, and container apps, it will actually author that component on your behalf. That's it. So this is in the portal today. You can find it there, and it's currently in preview.
Thank you, Nick. And thank you, Daria, for taking us through this. I have a quick question here from the audience on the difference between jobs and functions. Like we released ACI jobs today. So, and we have always had Azure functions. Who wants to take this?
I can take it. And then
Okay.
yeah. Just use Azure functions. No, yeah. Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about, I would say, jobs, there's a few really cool things that was introduced, I would say, with container apps is, these jobs can be long running, whereas in functions, they're designed timer triggers to be short lived, so I think there's obviously, benefits if they're very short lived and you want to kick off lots of things in parallel, then functions, can still be used through the timer trigger. But if you want full on jobs that you can control through an ARM API, then that's what container apps gives you, that long running, plus you can stop them, you can have control over them. That isn't possible inside of functions. But obviously functions has timer triggers, and for those short-lived runtimes and you want to use functions, then definitely continue to use them. So can I use jobs independent of whether I'm using the rest of my app in function, container apps, or AKS? I cannot answer, but yes is what I would say, because he actually showed it, I think, where they're just jobs today inside of it. Yeah. Anthony, you want to clarify it? Yeah.
I actually missed that last part. Can I run jobs independent?
Do I need a container app to run my job?
No.
Or can I run the rest of my application could be an AKS application, a functions application.
Yeah.
And I could just have jobs in Azure Container Apps.
Right. Okay. So yeah, you can just have jobs if you want. You don't have to have a container app to use jobs.
Thank you. So we have a couple of questions for AKS in the chat right now. Could you describe any new security features in the AKS container runtime environments to protect my running apps?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Quite several of them actually. So one of them, I did mention it in the slide, is the GA of workload identity. So pretty excited about that. We also have and continue to have multiple capabilities added to Defender, which is our security scanning tool that scans both, images, registries, the runtime as well. It does threat detection. So definitely something that we've been investing a lot on, and that we're pretty excited to continue to invest more and more and improve the security posture and do more for customers, integrate with policy, and continue to do more integration with our CoPilot suites. And so workload identity, obviously the improvements in Defender. We also have right now in preview something that we call image cleaner, which is essentially the ability, oftentimes on scanners, you get the issue that, oh, you have vulnerability in your container image. Then you go and you fix that and you deploy it. And then your nodes, for example, still have the previous iteration of that cached image, and that still pops up. Oh, easy cron job. You can take it, you can clean it, but it's annoying and you have to build that cron job yourself. So we build it for you basically, and you can actually get that cron job for free by using image cleaner. It will actually scan everything once a day and clean all those images for you. Yeah, those are some examples that we've had recently.
Thanks, George. Okay, we are 5 minutes away from the end of the session. So any last question in the room? Okay, let's go with you. We'll take both.
You recently increased the amount of memory for Azure Container Apps. Does that apply to jobs? So you can get 8 gig? Oh, fantastic. That was a nice, easy question.
For the record, I nodded.
Okay, another question here.
Hello. Yeah, so I have a question for Container Apps team. I've used KEDA. I've used Dapr a lot. I have a couple of features that I'm interested in for Dapr, which are still in early preview. Now, when I deploy my Container Apps, I cannot target a specific version of Dapr API. So is there any way I can do this now, or any future plans to support that?
I'll take this one. It's something that we're discussing, so it's definitely on the table. I don't know how much I can share about that publicly, but it's a pretty ongoing conversation right now, and we're hearing this request a lot from customers. So it's a priority for us to explore.
Is confidential containers coming to ACA?
I'll do on the mic. We're thinking about it, but no idea yet.
So the workflows are out, but I work with financial services software, and they're all workflows. But I have to code the workflows in Dapr, right? Ideally, I wanted to have either an engine or to configure my workflows in Dapr. Is that something you've been looking at? I need some sort of orchestration for all my workflows.
Yeah, so that's also something that we're hearing quite a few requests for, and is an ongoing conversation. What I can say is eventually yes. So the timing of that is when and what the experiences that we'll offer. So that's still up in the air.
And quick thing to put that if you have feature requests and stuff that you really want, yay, conversation. We have a roadmap, and I want to say that the link to aka.ms/ACA issues, ACA-issues. I'm sure that Daria in the chat. So yeah.
Thank you. We still have time. I was too early to say we're almost done. Yes.
Perhaps a simple question, but what's the difference or what's the use cases between ACI and ACA?
ACI is Azure Container Instance. ACA is Azure Container Apps. Go for it, Anthony. I think you have the mic.
Sure, but I was actually going to see if Daria wants to take
Daria?
questions.
Happy to. But I would also love to hear from the rest of the team. When we think about ACA, we're thinking about engaging at app level, whether it is modernizing an application and lifting and shifting into Azure because we don't enforce a programming model, or whether it is building a microservice. So with that said, when we engage at app level, we're really focusing on the business logic. So we're building in all the capabilities that you need to represent your apps, to discover your apps, to help them communicate, to help them scale, all in the same execution environment, same observability, same isolation or networking boundary. And when we think about ACI, we see a lot more workloads that may be built for infrastructure, because some of these capabilities that are cross-cutting across microservices, that are cross-cutting across basically getting those apps to work together in the same microservice solution, they're not leading in that product presentation. So I think, of course, we would love to make sure that we hear more perspectives on that, but I would really encourage you to approach this from the perspective of engaging at app level, building apps and microservices, and really addressing all the jobs to be done for those apps and microservices, including scale, including service discovery, including making sure that those apps are connected together. And if anyone wants to jump in the room, please go ahead.
Yeah, I can jump in a little bit. So some things that I think we've also seen is that ACI doesn't really have that scale to zero capability inbuilt and native, right? So if you're using something like ACA, it's fully serverless. We do scale to zero. We can scale all the way back in, right? And then the other thing is that for ACI, a lot of it is running jobs. ACA, we can run jobs now, but we can also run longer just apps, right? That aren't necessarily jobs and can be running for a longer period of time.
On the note of jobs, there's a question in the chat.
Okay, maybe I can say it faster than I can type. So there was a question about whether or not there's out-of-the-box overlap protection for, I assume, cron jobs or scheduled jobs. Oh, actually, it says right there, scheduled jobs. So by default, jobs will run. Oh, by default, jobs will run, or scheduled jobs will start on the schedule. So even if there's an existing one running, it'll run. And we currently don't expose the knob for you to change the concurrency policy, but we can definitely look into that so that you can prevent overlaps from running.
There was one more question in the room.
I hope this isn't too low level for the experts in the room, but my organization is at the very beginning of our modernization journey, and we're mainly working with legacy apps that we inherited. There are so many options and so many tools that do slightly different but similar things. Where do we start?
Century. Question of the century. Who wants to take this?
I can take a first stab at it. It really depends on what you want. If you, I think there was a really great image from a previous session showing the spectrum between Azure Container Apps and Azure Kubernetes, where Azure Container Apps, we're here to give you a more simple, straightforward system versus Kubernetes gives you so much control and so much ability to really fiddle with the knobs and bolts. So if you want to just start out and you're not sure and you don't want to have to deal with the expertise of Kubernetes, Container Apps is a great place to start. But if you want to really get in depth with Kubernetes and get in the details, Azure Kubernetes would be a great source. And then I don't have as much expertise in functions and stuff, so yeah.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I think one thing I would start with is there's really awesome guidance on the Azure Architecture Center. So I would start there because they have put a lot with us and everyone else and customers thought into what are the different types of solutions you're trying to build, what are the right services that you can use to take advantage of the cloud for those solutions, how should you think about deploying, managing, monitoring, securing. That is really awesome place. And not only do they have the guidance in the documentation, they have what they call landing zones as well that actually have built-in knowledge into infrastructure as code that you can deploy these types of solutions in the optimal way for Azure. And so that's where I would really start. And they even have guidance on which service to use for which type of applications, what are the pros and cons. Because it is, as you said, can get kind of complex, but I think they've done a really good job of trying to help you understand where your solution is and how you could take advantage of the cloud in Azure.
I can tell you for a fact, Eamon's answer is basically ChatGPT's answer. So if you go to Chat,
But he didn't GPT it.
you can also use that. But yeah, Architecture Center is the best for that.
As a former solutions architect, I will just say this to you. As you begin your modernization journey, first map out your legacy app for what you need. Like functionally, what is your need? We can map the service later on, but functionally, if you're able to identify how you want to piece it together, if it's a monolith, do you want to get into a microservice? Do you want to take it as is? What modules do you want to develop when? And then eventually, the last stage is mapping out what is where. That will be the easiest. Okay. So another one is about workload profiles for ACA. We want to know what are these workload profiles. I know Daria touched upon it a little bit. If we can dive into what it takes to have the workload profiles. Daria, anyone else in the room?
Actually, Mike might be on the call.
Mike, yes.
Hi, so workload profiles is essentially we introduced the concept of previously we only had a consumption plan where you could run containers on demand and essentially where we had scale to zero, where you only build for the instance that is running. But with workload profiles, we introduced the concept of if you want to have dedicated VMs and manage your workloads on them dynamically. So you can have multiple instances of the same app and you own that VM. So you can have, say, a VM with 64 gigs of RAM or 16 vCore CPU, and you can choose the model that fits well for your workloads. And that's the primary concept behind workload profile.
So on the workload profile, can I set that through like a bicep file and all that when I'm doing it?
Yes, yeah. So you can even set like scale limits for these VMs. So as essentially, if you're, for example, if you are using compute optimized workload profile, and you can say, I want minimum 3 count and maximum 5 counts. So based on your workloads, as they are themselves scaling out, the underlying VMs would scale out as well.
So the workload profiles is the first time where you can actually use ACA in an enterprise context because you did a lot of work under the hood with Envoy and whatnot, right? So you can actually use it behind the firewall.
Yep. Yeah.
When is that GA?
Yeah.
I can address it. So in terms of GA, we actually have a public roadmap and we definitely publish our timelines there when available. For workload profiles specifically, we're trying to accelerate the GA timeline. So I would look for that in the next few months. Also, in terms of enterprise scenarios, I think really as long as you don't require very fine-grained egress controls, our GA consumption plan is still a great option. If you do require egress control and smaller subnet sizes, then yes, the workload profiles would be the best option there. And I can copy the link to our public roadmap so you can stay tuned to any Azure Container Apps updates and timeline updates.
Thank you, Daria. Okay, now we are definitely 5 minutes away from the end of the session. Any other questions in the room, in the chat? Nate, any other questions?
So there was a question that came up in, I think, one of the earlier sessions today about AKS CoPilot. So this question was, can you tell me more about the best practices AKS CoPilot knows about the service? Will it apply the settings like max memory or CPU? I guess, what is it capable of?
So it doesn't know anything about your environment per se in its current state. It's 100% an AI assistant in the same way that, you know, GitHub Copilot, etc., doesn't know anything about the code you plan to build or, you know, the whole thing. It will know from the context that you pass it and that you give it and that you provide for it. So you can ask it to say, hey, how can I monitor this cluster? Hey, can you write me a query to find out the CPU usage of the nodes of this cluster, and it will do that with that context, given that proper. But it's not going to inspect your environment and do that. We do have Azure Advisor for that purpose that actually provides that information personalized for each environment already today. And we do have Kube Copilot, which is inside a cluster with prompt engineering as well. You're actually able to go and do a full diagnose, for example, that will tell you if there's anything wrong with the cluster and exactly what you need to do for it, or at least the suggestions that the service will have to do for it. So you have kind of the full-fledged, GPT abilities to ask any question that will use the context that you provide to it, saying like this cluster, it will actually at that point, it will be integrated as well with our editors. So it will generate YAML files. And for example, you can immediately see them pasted on our editors, but it won't, you know, it's not proactively doing anything and it won't apply anything per se. So it's not really going to, if you tell it, can you scale my cluster to X? It can tell you how to scale, but it's not going to scale it for you. This is still an action that you need to actually accept and paste yourself.
Okay, thank you, George. Yes. Wait,
oh, I'm sorry, I should be talking to you then.
Yeah, so it was more along when you, I think it was you, whoever did the demo, they asked to create a container based on something. And when they did that, if you would have said something like and apply default best practices, it probably would have did that. Yeah. That's awesome.
It would,
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So actually on the session that I linked in the chat as well, we did a lot of that as well. So we delved into it. And even in our Code to Cloud session as well, we did something which was asking, in that case was GitHub Copilot, to actually apply things like Prometheus scraping and environment variables that will also automatically populate it. So that he would do, yeah.
Okay, that was the last question for the session. Thank you everyone for joining us, and do leave your feedback in the evals provided.